Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Divorce Den. We are honored again to speak with Melissa Murphy-Pavone, and today we are going to be talking about that unglamorous topic of insurance. And when it comes to getting divorced or separated, something that is often forgotten or that is thought about maybe later when it comes to budgeting going forward is insurance. People often think about like support, or they're thinking about how they're going to divide their assets, but they don't think about these really big important topics and these important numbers that have to be considered when they're moving forward. So today we're going to talk about the big three, and I'm going to turn it over to Melissa to give us sort of a breakdown of what the big three are and how it is that they're going to affect you every day if you don't do it right from the beginning. So I'll turn it over to you, Melissa, and thank you again for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so happy to be back on Divorce Den. Insurance is not a fun topic, right? It costs money. It's not a fun purchase. There's not an immediate gratification of it, but it is very important to have. And today we're going to talk about car insurance, health insurance, and life insurance. And oftentimes, the big three. And oftentimes, they're not discussed. You know, like you said earlier, people are thinking about their house, their retirement, but they're not thinking about the car insurance, the health insurance, and the life insurance. And we're here today because the devil's in the details, and we need to get into the nitty-gritty. And the more information that you have ahead of time, the more thorough your documents will be, and then you won't have to come back and revisit this later. Because I'm sure you see oftentimes, right, if we don't dot our I's and cross our T's, people are going to come back, and that just costs more money, and we're trying to save people money.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's a really good point that you bring up because this is going to cost people money no matter what, right? Anything that we purchase costs money. Insurance can fluctuate so much, and it can be very different rates if you're a married couple as opposed to single. And I talk about all the time how you should not litigate. Most of the times when I'm in court, you never hear this come up as far as insurance, what it's going to cost, what the premiums are, who the beneficiary is, all of that. The courts are not going to address it. They want to move a case forward as quickly as possible. And thinking about the devil in the details, they're not thinking about that. But this is important to your future. So if you're thinking about getting divorced or separated, please make sure that you're taking notes and listen to all of these pointers that Melissa has, because they really are going to set you up for success if you do it right.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's start with car insurance. We all have it. We all need it. It's often kind of like the cell phone plan, right? The family plan. We're all on the same policy together. I was recently dealing with a client, and we were going through kind of like that post-divorce transition. I like to refer to it as cash flow instead of budget. And I saw under car insurance, it was 4 digits and not 3. It was over $1,000. It was like $1,300. And in my head, I was like, oh, I'm a numbers person. I'm like, oh, it's probably 300. That was a typo, mistake. And I asked her about it, and she said, no, that's how much it costs. We have a teen driver. And my mouth, dropped. I was like, oh my God, my jaw dropped. I was like, that is a huge amount of your income to be spending on car insurance. I'm like, have you discussed with your attorneys who is going to cover the kids moving forward? Like, will they stay on one spouse's plan versus the other? And she said, no, we didn't discuss that. Mm-hmm. And she was like, is that part of support, right? Like, about the support payments. I said, okay, this is a legal question, right? We need to go back to the attorneys and say, who's responsible for covering the car insurance? And so we had to shop it out, right? Not just for the child, right? The teen driver, but also for her and her spouse to be on different plans. So a lot of times people don't think about this when they're in it, and then they have to come back to you later. So we're trying to save everybody time and money, make sure we dot our I's and cross our T's, and it's really important. And sometimes people don't even know who their car insurance is with, right? You just get in the car. Sometimes people don't even know if their car is registered to them, or, like, just because you drive a car doesn't mean you own that car or you're, insured on that car. So we want to go through and make sure that we get all of those details. Someone else recently brought up, right, about like changing their name, and they're like, do I have to change my address on my driver's license if I'm moving, and then do I change my name? And there's so many questions that go along with this, but making sure that your vehicle now reflects your name and you're correct, like the correct ownership of that, right? And that might require going to DMV, which we all hate, and dealing and dealing with that. But it's really important. So I always say, before we're signing documents, let's get the car insurance company on the phone. Let's get some price quotes. What does this look like if you take this car on a new policy by yourself? Sometimes you have to shop it around and get a different quote from a different car insurance company. I know personally my car insurance just went up drastically. So that's a real thing that's happening that we need to make sure that we don't skip over.
And with the cost of insurance going up all across the country for sure, especially with a young driver on there, this is something that, like you said, should be thought about and researched well in advance. Don't wait until afterwards, because then maybe you haven't budgeted properly. Maybe you're not talking about those support numbers through the lens of reality. Because if you're only talking about basic child support, which is food, clothing, and shelter, nowhere in there does it say anything about the car or the insurance. So that can be a really big hit, because a lot of times you have a family plan with the two parents and maybe the kids and the occasional driver, and then you get some sort of discount, especially if it's bundled maybe with your homeowner's insurance. And now that you're going to be splitting, those rates can look very different. So getting that information in advance is so important, and getting the numbers. And it might be a little shocking, it might fit into your budget in a different way, but you can't get blindsided by it later, because it really could financially cripple you.
Yeah, and I think that's what you said, so important, that blindsided piece. You don't want there to be surprises. My job as a CDFA is really to uncover all of these things so that there are no surprises and that we are prepared. I'm not going to say it's not going to be expensive. I'm not going to say it doesn't suck, but you're going to know about it ahead of time so you don't feel like the rug is getting ripped out from underneath you.
Yeah, and that's the most important thing, right? No one here is going to say, okay, well, we can find it for you cheaper. Sometimes that's not the reality, but we want you to have the reality in advance so that you can now prepare for it. And if it means tweaking the budget somewhere else to make that work, if it means, maybe trying to find out if there's other discounts that you can get for car insurance, then that's what you're going to do from the beginning. It's not about promising somebody a lower rate. We can't do that, but we can certainly promise you a lot more clarity, and having that financial clarity from the beginning is very, very important. So let's talk
Absolutely.
about then number two. What's the number two big insurance pitfall that we should look out for?
Health insurance, and this is a big one. No matter how old you are, this is really important because, once again, you're right, you're probably on a group plan through an employer, and now that changes. Whether you have access to your own retirement or your own health insurance plan through your employer, or if you're not, then to go to the marketplace. But again, we go back to the kids, right? Like who's going to be responsible for the children's health insurance? COBRA is a temporary option to, keep the status quo of the insurance after there is, that separation of service or that divorce. However, it's temporary and it's very, very expensive. You don't realize how good your benefits are until you have to pay for COBRA health insurance, and you're like, oh, I did not appreciate my company helping to supplement this. So I think that's really important. And oftentimes people don't know this either. The family plan, sometimes it's just individual or family, or it's individual and spouse and then family. So I'm working on a case right now where there is husband, wife, and daughter. They're all on mom's insurance through work. They're going to get divorced. The husband has to find his own. And then I said, all right, let's talk to HR, right? Call HR, find out what the premiums are. Now, once we take your husband off and we have your daughter on, and there's no, in her plan, which it's very plan specific, it's individual or family, that's it. There's no in between. So it's not individual plus one, there's not individual plus spouse. So in this case, it's actually more cost effective to keep her on her insurance, and then for the child to go to the marketplace and get the child their own policy, because there's not that gap. And I'm not saying that's for everybody. It's very plan specific. So you have to reach out to HR. You have to find out. Another thing to think about is, open enrollment is normally in November, this constitutes a life event, right? So you don't have to wait until that open enrollment period to change your health insurance if you're getting divorced, because this is a life event and that triggers that. So you're able to do that mid-year based upon the divorce. That's really important too. You don't want to, and there's usually a window of time, right? So there's not like a, hey, I'll get to this. It's, hey, we need to let HR know. Sometimes it's only 30 days in order to get these things. So the more information we have ahead of time, the better off everyone will be, and the better decisions that we can make when we come to the table, knowing how much things are, knowing what that timeline is, and what, where we can go from here.
Yeah, and that's really important because just like we were talking about with the car insurance, knowing it in advance is so important just for your budget going forward. But also when we're talking about the legal agreement, when you get divorced, it has to be included in there who's going to maintain the insurance for the children. And if we're just blanket saying, okay, well, mom, in your situation, mom carries the insurance now through her employer, she'll continue to do that. Well, unless we specify that that there's going to be a change in it and that they're going to share in the costs of it, unless we're very specific about it, and we just say mom maintains the insurance now, she'll continue to do that, then the presumption will be she's going to continue to pay for it regardless of if there's any change, right? If it's just mom, individual, and then it's the family plan, well, then she's then she's required to pay for the entire family plan, and the other parent doesn't have to pay for any of it. So we need to know that in advance, and we need to negotiate that in advance and have it spelled out very clearly in that agreement.
Yeah, that's really important. And then I also like to know, like, if you are changing insurance, whether you're going from, a spouse's plan to your own employer's plan or to the marketplace, you want to check, right, with your doctors to make sure they accept that insurance. It shouldn't always be a price thing. They focus oftentimes on like the price. And I often tell them, who are the most important doctors that you see? And what now, are they in network or out of network? What are the deductibles? What are the premiums? But also, like, do they accept the insurance? Because you do not want to change your doctors, regardless of your medical history, midway, And so those things, the in-network and out-of-network, play a big role in this, especially for mental health. If you have a in-network mental health professional that you're working with, you don't want to start over, after you have an established relationship. So I really try to get my clients to do that research ahead of time. And this is the thing that, divorce doesn't always go so quickly, right? So when we're in that sort of like in between meeting phase, I like to assign homework, right? Because like oftentimes you feel that you don't have any control over this process, right? And it's kind of like part of it is a waiting game. So in between these meetings, if we can gather this information, how much the car insurance will look like, what are the forms necessary to get off the family health insurance, those little things, feel like you're taking steps forward in a time where you feel like your hands are tied, right? And it's just like a waiting game. So I think it's a powerful piece to get those financial facts for you, and then you're making decisions from a place of financial empowerment and true facts, and not just guessing on what could be or maybe.
Right, and that's a really good point because I've actually had clients who have done their own calculations. So if this is how much it is for the family plan, and then so there's 4 of us, but if we divide it by 4, then I'm going to pay 25%, and then they sort of calculate and budget for that. That's not necessarily how it works. That's actually probably not how it works.
Yeah.
You don't get to divide it up and that there's 4 people, so there's going to be equal payments. No, you have to contact the provider and find out exactly how much it is and how much it's going to be in the coming years, because sometimes they even know if there's going to be a rate change. Okay, well, this is how much it is now, but come November, the rate change is going up. You need that information in advance so you can start to make informed decisions. Yeah, so that's really important. So thanks for sharing that.
Well, wait, before we go on that, I have a legal question for you.
Yeah, so in New York, right, I can only speak to New York, but in New York it is basic child support. The calculation that is in the statute is food, clothing, shelter, period. However, on top of that, there is also a requirement to share in the costs for the health insurance premiums and then for out-of-pocket expenses. Generally, how it's done is New York State considers it to be the parent's responsibility on a pro rata basis. So if one parent earns just for ease of numbers, I'm not a numbers person, if one parent earns $50,000 and the other parent earns $50,000, well, then it's going to be a 50-50 basis, right? You each earn about the same, so you would be expected to pay 50% of whatever those copays are, whatever the out-of-pocket expenses are going to be for the children. If there's a big disparity, then that rate changes, where one might have to pay 20%, one might have to pay 80%. But the beauty of being outside of court is you can always negotiate and decide how much you're going to pay. But there is always an expectation that there will be additional, aside from the basic child support of food, clothing, and shelter, there will be additional payments made to contribute to the health insurance premiums and the out-of-pocket.
That's important. Good to know.
It is
And
important.
I know, we're big fans of our family wizard and talking about how we can, kind of monitor what those out-of-pocket expenses are. When you go to the doctor, you can take a picture of the receipt or the co-payment or have flex spending, that way we can track it and it's not that constant like back and forth. So there are
Yeah.
great apps out there too for families as a resource.
And that really is a good point, because sometimes, just for myself, I forget sometimes how much something is, or I have a receipt or I have a stack of receipts and I intend to scan them in one day, but it just doesn't happen. Having that app and having the ability to take a picture, upload it, done. You can throw that out. That app is going to save it. So it's really a great resource, and there's many out there, but we generally like to advocate for our family wizard because that's what we're familiar with, and it does so much. It really does a lot to help families keep everything in one spot, keep it all organized, and make sure that everyone knows what the percentage is. And it'll do the calculations for you too, as long as it knows what that pro rata amount is. It'll do the calculations for you in the app.
That's awesome.
Yeah, really, really good. So,
So
yeah, so we talked about the car insurance, big deal, especially when you have young kids, those young kid drivers. And then we talked about health insurance. And then what about the third in our big three?
life insurance, and it's sort of an uncomfortable topic to talk about, but it is so crucial when we're talking about divorce, for so many reasons. And I'm really passionate about this, and I think oftentimes, and you can attest to this, people just say, oh yeah, I have a group policy through work, right? I have a group term insurance, I'm covered. Like famous last words. Like, one, you're not going to have that job
They say it all
forever.
the time. They say it all the time, literally. Yeah.
You're not going to have that job for the rest of your life, right? And you, as the employee, have the ability to change, right, who that beneficiary is. So I, as a fiduciary and a CDFA and a CDFP, always like that there's a new clean policy to cover spouses when there are children involved, to cover support, child support, and maintenance should your divorce include those things. And I think that's really important. And I like that they're cross-owned. So Liz, you and I are married, we're getting divorced. I want to own a policy and I'm going to be the owner and the payer. You're going to be the insured. And that way I know that I am paying the policy. I know who the beneficiary is. And I know if that policy were to lapse, that's on me. And you should have the, vice versa. Oftentimes they're just saying like, oh, we have existing policies and we'll just, change the beneficiary. And sometimes insurability becomes an issue, right? Or price, it becomes prohibitive if you are uninsurable. So we take every case differently, but in a perfect world, you get a new policy that's separate and cross-owned for you and your spouse. And it's really important to do that. And unfortunately, I've seen the flip side of it when it's not done properly, and you can't fight it, right? When someone is passed away, whoever is on that beneficiary form is on that beneficiary form. It trumps the will, it trumps the divorce decree, whatever it is, that's who's getting paid out. And then there is no more money, right, for child support or maintenance in a premature death.
Yeah, and I often see in agreements that if you're supposed to be the beneficiary of it, and that your ex-partner changed it, you have the right to go after the estate. By the time you do that, first of all, who has time to do that when you're raising kids? Number two, who has the money to do that? Because now you're not receiving the support. You have to pay somebody to go and sue. And there's no guarantee of success, and there might not be any money left, like you said. So by the time you do all of this, it could just completely financially devastate you. So the solution is, like you were talking about, these cross policies, which is not very common, I'll be honest, right? That it's just not something that a lot of people think about. Attorneys don't think about it because we're not in that financial mind space. And again, courts do not think about this at all. It's just make sure that there's insurance policies out there for support purposes. What does that mean? What are the finer details? That's up to you. And oftentimes, this is something that I see a lot, like way too often, is that one parent will have the child listed as the beneficiary, and then the other parent as, the executor, or, as the administrator. Okay, but a child, a 6-year-old, is going to be the beneficiary. So do you want to talk about what the implications are there and what the dangers are of doing that?
Yeah, it's really dangerous having a minor listed as a beneficiary without the proper trust documents necessary. There are ways, if there are existing policies or existing trusts, that you can work it out with your ex-spouse, but that involves an estate planning attorney and a financial professional. And I want everybody, even if you're not getting divorced, to go check where these policies are, right? Who is the owner, who is the insured, and who is the beneficiary? Because you might not know, right? And you might have had another kid, and maybe the contingent beneficiary doesn't include your other kid, or maybe there's an ex-spouse, or maybe you had a policy when you were younger and a sibling, right? Or your parents were on it and it just hasn't been updated and you forgot about it. So it's really crucial. I always try to do it around like daylight savings times, like twice a year. Like when you're changing the batteries in your smoke detector, also check your beneficiaries as just like a reference point to just always know kind of where everything is. And that's really what I stress, right? As mindful divorce partners, I want financial clarity, and I want everyone to know what they own, why they own it, and where it is.
And then what the ramifications are, because if we're talking about naming a child as the beneficiary without those proper trust documents, that child, if they're under the age of 18, is not going to be able to receive that. So you need some sort of protection in order to ensure that the money is going to get to the children, because then it's going to be held up if you don't do it right.
Yeah. And going back to life insurance, and I know, we had a case on this together, but when we look at a life insurance, right, depending upon what type of policy it is it a true life insurance policy, or is there a cash value, and then that has to be put on the balance sheet as perhaps a marital asset because there's cash there that one of the spouses can tap into. So that's important also, like, again, back to the devil of the details, that we really take a look at everything and not just say, hey, yeah, check the box, I have insurance, we're good there. But to see the statement, to have a financial person do a once over and look at it, there's no harm in just reviewing it and really understanding what you own.
Yeah, and that's really important, because as attorneys, we are trained to see things through a legal lens, but I'm not trained in finances. So when I look at a life insurance policy, I see, is this whole life or term? That's about as deep as I'm going, I'm going to be honest. Whole life or term, and what's the number, right? What's the death benefit?
Death benefit.
Yeah, aside from that, when you come down to it, there are so many hidden details and so many layers to insurance that somebody like you just has the skill set and the eye for that an attorney doesn't. So it's really, really important that anyone who is thinking about getting divorced or separated, for sure reach out to Melissa, for sure reach out to a CDFA and speak to them about reviewing these policies. Because like you said, Melissa, there's no harm in reviewing it. All it's going to do is give you clarity, give you information, and give you the knowledge to make informed decisions.
Absolutely.
Do you have any closing words of wisdom or tidbits regarding insurance, the most unpopular topic to talk about, but as far as ways that people can start to think about it and view it a little bit differently if they're thinking about getting divorced or separated?
Yeah, I really just want the focus to be that it's not just paperwork, and don't just check the box. Really take the time and take this opportunity to really look over it with a fine-tooth comb, have a financial professional, have that second set of eyes to review it because it is really important. You know, that the car insurance, the health insurance, especially the life insurance, these things that are often mislooked through this traumatic time and financial transition, but it's super important because what if we say, okay, I'm going to assume the mortgage, right, and buy out my spouse and keep their marital home, not knowing that, yes, maybe I can afford the mortgage and the taxes, but now my car insurance just doubled, my health insurance just doubled, we don't have life insurance, or I can't afford life insurance. Like, those things matter, right? So when we try to look at it, you know, CDFAs, we zoom out and are looking at it from a holistic standpoint of not just how these decisions are going to affect you today, but how they're going to impact your family 5, 10, 20 years down the line. And I think that's so important because when you're in it, it's so hard to see through it.
It is. I agree. Absolutely. So thank you again for joining us and for walking us through the big three insurance areas that people really need to keep their eyes open for and really need to get clarity on. So thank you so much again, Melissa, for joining us today on Divorce Den. And if anyone has any questions or wants any more information, take a deeper dive here, please drop a comment and let us know. And we will see you next time on the Divorce Den.
Talk to you soon. Bye.